I'm here today to talk with you about scaling workflows and management and what my experiences have been since I started at Etsy. So my name is Michael Rembetsy, and right now I'm the VP of Technical Operations at Etsy. So I'm here today to talk about scaling workflow and management. However, things that we're going to talk about, everyone here is responsible for their own culture. So taking some of the things that you hear that may or may not fit, bringing them back to where you currently work and then growing your own culture is your responsibility. So we're going to go through a couple things. But first, like I said, I work at Etsy. Etsy is a marketplace where creative people around the world connect to buy and sell unique goods. Etsy is the marketplace that we all make together. And our mission is to reimagine commerce in ways that build a more fulfilling and lasting world. Here are some things that you may or may not know about Etsy. This is a recent stat. We have 30 million active members, 900,000 active shops. We do 1.4 billion page views a month. And we have buyers and sellers active in over 200 countries around the world. Some other interesting facts, 400 plus full-time employees, just to give you an idea of the current scale and size of the company. And on average, we do 35 web deploys a day. We have lots of other stacks that we deploy in a day, upwards of 60 deploys in a day. However, if we stay just with these numbers, which will kind of go up towards Christmas but go down, we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 12,000 deploys for web only this year. Now, we're not Amazon, but hey, I think that's pretty good. So, and we have offices all over the world. We have offices in Berlin, London, obviously Brooklyn, Hudson, New York, San Francisco, Australia, and Dublin. We have some other smaller office space that's shared out in a couple other countries like France and Amsterdam, but those are the big ones. And Etsy is a B-certified corporation. We voluntarily meet higher standards in the way that we do business. We're more transparent and more accountable to ourselves and to the business world, and we expect all of our vendors and partners to actually be B Corps with us eventually one day. And we also have a focus on carbon footprint as well as how we actually do our business. So let me give you an idea real quick of the current team, where they're located, how many people they are, and how they break down. So this is the production ops team. That includes database administrators, guys who get up in the middle of the night, fix things, data center administration, rack and stack. And we're located from London all the way to San Francisco. So we have some pretty decent coverage. We also have a Corp IT team. Those guys are responsible for making sure that all the internal networking switches, wireless access points, laptops that we accidentally spill whiskey on are taken care of, things like that. And they're located in Brooklyn, New York. We're soon to be looking to expand Corp IT out into international. And finally, I'm also responsible for the security and the risk and fraud aspect of Etsy's infrastructure and web presence. So now you kind of know the lay of the land of what I'm responsible for. So I want to rewind way back in the beginning of late 2008 when I joined. There were two of us. God, I had a lot of hair. But so when I joined in 2008, there were about 35 people or so. And the office had, a skate ramp upstairs. It was like wood paneling in Brooklyn, really, really hip, pretty cool. And when I walked in with Rob, that's Rob Aboumian and myself, we kind of felt like this. We're like, yeah, it's Etsy, man. It's cool. We're so happy, right? Because we're doing, we had green fields essentially, but we understood that there were some problems. And Chad Dickerson, who was the CTO at the time, he made you feel like that too, which I think was pretty special and pretty important. However, it wasn't all superheroes. About 2 weeks in, this is how I felt. I was like, what the fuck did I do? I mean, literally, I couldn't understand what was going on. So I'll give you some ideas. So my background, obviously, is in the web, and I ran some things like iVillage.com and Monopoly for McDonald's online. So I had kind of a little inflated ego at the time, and walked into Etsy, and I was like, yeah, let's go to the data center. Let's go check it out. And my first week at Etsy, when I joined in November 9th, 2008, I went to the data center with Chad Dickerson, who's my boss. And I said, hey, yeah, let's check out those networking switches because I come from a network background. Plugged my laptop in, and can anyone who's not Etsy guess what happened? No, the whole site went down. I was like, oh shit. Like literally, that was the words that came out of my mouth. And I looked to the corner, and Chad's like, it's all good, and I could see the nervousness. But So I did my investigation. It was really exciting. I took a look, and then I unplugged my laptop from the network, and can you guess what happened? Fucking went down again. So I was like, I can't win, right? This is the first 2 weeks, and I was extremely nervous. You know, new job. I had a kid on the way, and we did some crazy things in the first 2 weeks, like turning Akamai up, you know, before Cyber Monday, installing new firewalls the day after Thanksgiving because the old ones didn't work, and that really pissed the community off. And this reminds me a lot of how we were managing things. And back then, because it was kind of startup mode, we were managing things from a really big list. It's a hugely complicated technical thing, right? No, it's a big list of things that are going on. And this flow was actually, this workflow was actually what we used for the better part of almost a year and a half at Etsy. The culture was one of which we had stand-ups, and we'd pass around a Polycom phone for the remotes that we had at the time. And we would give our updates, and we would say how things were. And oftentimes, out of this list, we would work on the things that were the loudest. Rob would say, what's the squeaky wheel of the day? And I'm like, I don't know, let's go find out, right? Because it was also something where we were context switching constantly from left to right. You know, oh, go work on this, this is loud, this is not. So when you do enough of that context switching, things start slipping, and you feel like you're standing in the tracks and you're about to be hit in the face by a train, right? You're like, oh my God, this is not working for me. So the reason why there's no metrics is because I didn't have time to capture them in 2008, and I didn't even think about it. So I could literally just show you a train and a list of, you know, a word that says a big list. So in 2009 as well, we spent a lot of time working on cleaning up the technical debt that we had actually had. We added from 2 people to 4 people by the end of 2009. And we had started to talk to management about some things. So let's talk about management real quick. Those things that we talked to management about, because Chad was the CTO at the time, were how we were going to change, right? What we were going to do, what the future looked like. And some of the key pieces that I think you should take away are that management was very supportive of us, namely Chad. Chad was up with us when the site was down. He was out at the data center when I broke it. And he was involved from day one. So we had really quite a lot of support and interest in what we were doing. And we were taking that very seriously. And we were taking downtimes every 2 weeks in 2009, pulling 30 to 32-hour days to fix the underlying fundamental technical debt that we had created for ourselves in the years previous. And the piece that management took away, or that I took away from management out of 2009, that I think is important and is kind of known, but I'm going to reiterate it, is that we created this site called fix.etsy.com, right? And we communicated with the community saying, hey, look, we know that the changes that we're going to make are hugely impactful for you and your business and what you're actually doing day in and day out. But in order to succeed in the longer years, the 3, 4, 5 years down the road, we need to make sure that we are making these changes and fixing those fundamental problems, and we're adding and changing the workflow so we can work more effectively, and so can you, by adding better tooling later on, by adding, you know, features that you want, right? So what was good about a really big list? Well, we made progress with technical debt, slow, but we paid off the technical debt slowly by fighting fires and fixing those firewalls, with a few direct reports. A very large list actually made sense, right? We were able to have faith in each other and believe in actually what we were doing and trust each other, which I think was a really interesting point that Gene Kranz had made this morning. You know, trust. They would trust when I told them to turn the power off in the lunar module, right? Or that's crazy. So we trusted each other that if Rob said he was going to fail over the firewalls at 3 in the morning, I trusted it was going to work, even though it didn't. So we had cooperation. We actually were cooperating with one another better than we ever had before, because in 2008 it was a very siloed infrastructure. Database administrators didn't like developers didn't like support people, you know. And then finally, I think the good was also that we had some solid community communication finally. It's not to say, by the way, that we weren't communicating with the community. I just think that we were taking a different approach to the level of communication that we had. We had a more vested interest in what they wanted, and we were trying to get there. And we had to break some eggs to do it. Finally, we had to hire. That was definitely something that we needed to do. So we started to do that. So let's talk about the bad. Well, we were risking burnout. There were 4 of us by the end of 2009. We were working really long hours and risking burnout and not really focusing on a work-life balance was something that we knew was happening, but we had to do it. Priorities were often shuffled. It's hard to tell what to work on in the grander picture. What do we work on today? Is it the firewalls? No, we have to replace the cores. Oh, is it this? That was tough, which led to easily being context switched. Excuse me. Context switching, I think, is one of those things that demotivates a team faster than anything else because you're going heads down, moving very fast at a target, and then all of a sudden your brakes are put on and you're totally ripped in a different direction. It's really hard for many of us to do that. And like I said, we were always putting the fires out, and we really weren't concentrating on the people that worked for us, with us, and around us as managers as well as direct reports. So that was tough. And I often found that there was a lack of clarity in understanding what others were working on. Hey, what are you working on today? I don't know. What are you working on, right? And that happens in the startup field. So what I want to do next is give you an overview of kind of where the company was for 2008 and 2009. I think it's important that you understand throughout this presentation and what we're discussing, kind of the stages of how many people we had that were technical, i.e. engineers, and non-technical, as well as where the company was in what we measure what's called gross merchandise sales, which is the total sales that Etsy does for all of our sellers. That's not what we make, that's what is total for all of our sellers who make money, essentially. So in 2008, we did 87.3 million. In GMS, we had 49 total employees, and 12 of those were engineers. Not bad. I was one of them. 2009, bit of a change. 100% growth in GMS, 63% growth in total employees. So we went from 49 to 80, and we had 26 total engineers. We doubled our engineering staff. That's cool. And for the first time, we're actually able to measure our page views. 6.45 billion page views that month, or that year. And we had 4 ops folks, as I mentioned. So now we've got the idea of what 2008, 2009 looked like from management and a workflow perspective. Let's talk about the change. Be the change. I like that statement. And that's actually an Etsy ring, which I found really cool. So people in an organization should be able to take control and work with managers, small projects to make change. And that's what we did. So let's talk about some of the changes. We had from top-down and bottom-up buy-in to how we were going to change the workflow in the second stage. And we implemented Jira. The point is not that we implemented Jira. The point is that we chose a tool that we decided to put in place. I don't care what the tool is, but we decided to put one in. And we made that decision as a team. And the default workflow in Jira is what we used for a while, which didn't make a lot of sense to us at the time, but we didn't know any better. Another change is that we worked with management at the end of 2009 and into early 2010 to get a better idea of what was actually going to happen to the company. You know, at the end of 2009, we had stabilized the network. Thank God I was tired. And making sure that the site would not go down because I plugged my laptop in was kind of a huge deal, right? So we finally have stability in the network, and we finally have some people coming in to help us with some of these management changes and quarterly goals and project planning, such as Kellen Elliott McRae and John Allspaw. It's right there. And in 2010, we grew the team to 9 people. On this list, at least 3, well, 2.5, because I think Marcus ended up moving from Australia to Brooklyn in 2010. But a couple of them were in here, were remote. Lori and Aveline were both remote folks. So that's to give you an idea of what the team was in 2010 and what we had actually grown. And we realized that we had to kind of relax, calm down, and go with the flow, to say. Scaling the team from 4 to 9 created a unique challenge. The challenge was the default workflow that we were using inside of the tool, which was Jira, and no longer a big list, wasn't really working because we weren't really shipping what we wanted as quickly as we wanted. We still felt as though there was a context switch, and I often would ask those 9 people, or 8 or 7 who were reporting to me at the time, so wait, what are you working on again? And that was a really bad feeling. So we started looking around at different workflows, and this is 2010, mid-ish probably, and Marcus said, hey, I have this great idea. We should look into Kanban. So how many people out there know what Kanban is? That's awesome. Cool. So, it's developed in the late 40s by Toyota. It is just-in-time production system, and they held 6 basic rules to the actual principles that they were using, which was don't send defective products forward in the process, and make sure that what was going out was quality, was the exact quantity that you wanted and quality. Kanban is a means of fine-tuning as well that they had, stabilizing and rationalizing the process, and there were 2 others that I have here, but if you know it, great, I'm not going to bore you with it. So why did we think Kanban was actually important to us? What did we think we were going to gain out of it when we were making the decision? And before I show you the why we thought, how many are actually using Kanban right now? Okay, so a little less. Good to know. So we thought we'd get better transparency inside and outside of the operations team. And what I mean by that is the rest of the organization really needed a gateway or the ability to look into what we were doing and how busy we were. So that way people in other development groups could understand that if they needed to request work from us, how long it may take, or what else may be in the way that they could negotiate or talk to someone else about actually moving because their priority was higher. So that was the first thing we thought we'd get out of it. Higher output of work. I'm pretty sure we would get higher output of work with anything else. It was one of those times where we were like, we just got to try something new, and we did. And I'll get to that in a minute. Less context switching. Felt good, We thought we'd get less context switching because things would be prioritized. Decisions would be made and it would be clear of what to work on. It was, there were more conversations around the priorities between the people who were actually requesting the work and the people who were actually doing the work. That was our hope, right? The word collaboration is probably the big word here as opposed to cooperation. And I'll get a little bit more into that in a little while. And then overall, we thought we'd feel better as a team because we would have this fantastic new system in place that would give us all the things above. And the other thing to note is that because we had a couple remote people, we wanted to make sure that whatever tool we chose was able to be seen by the remotes. We couldn't put a physical board up in our office and actually move cards with 2 people being in London and a third coming on and a 4th eventually. So we needed a virtual product to actually do this. So we took all these ideas and I walked right on up to this guy. And I said, "Hey, John," and he looks at me like this. He says, "Mike, show me how it works." And if you've ever talked to John, that's actually pretty accurate. So I'm going to show you how our version 1 of Kanban actually worked back in 2010. So someone needs work, they put it into what we called the hopper. Now, that hopper is where all of the work went. Then we had a backlog, in progress, and done. It's a very simple board. Makes sense. Before I get to a couple more steps here, I want to bring up a concept that we introduced called designated operations people. We had different groups inside of our company. We had mobile, security, search, seller tools at the time, and we wanted to implant operational folks into those groups early, before there were architectural decisions, before there were code that was going out onto the site, in order to improve their process, help them learn about operational things, right? How to make Nagios alerts. Do you have enough graphing? Is the graphing going to alert with the Nagios correctly? Do we have enough visibility? Oh, I thought I needed 4 servers. I needed 40, right? Those are kind of the things that you want to avoid before things go live. So the designated ops was super important. Something else to note is that the hopper was solely controlled by John Allspaw and myself. We were responsible. He's laughing. But we were responsible for making sure that we prioritized the work, we moved it out of the backlog, or out of the hopper, and into the backlog, right? Once in the backlog, folks were able, everyone in operations was able to grab that work that they thought was prioritized, that was most important to actually be done, and move it to in progress, right? Really, really important. As long as John and I moved the work, right? Well, the other thing to note is that we have limits on our backlog and our in progress. We didn't want to have 500 tickets sitting in the hopper and then move all 500 into the backlog and be like, get all the work done, guys, right? It's kind of not the point of it. So we limited, I think very early on, we limited the backlog to, it was with 8 people, we limited it to like 14 tickets. And then we started with 1 ticket per person for in progress. And that really, really kind of chafed people. They were like, what do you mean I can't work on more than one thing? And it took a little while to get used to, but eventually what we did over time is we changed that as people got more used to the flow. So, of course, you can take everything and you move it to done, and then you keep moving over. This was our simple version 1 of Kanban for us. No swim lanes, nothing crazy, just 4 easy lanes that had work prioritized after it came in, and the designated ops people were responsible for picking that work up and actually having conversations. Now this is the board. I'm going to talk a little bit later, once I get into the new workflow that we're using, about the conversation that people actually have, because these conversations did happen in designated ops as well, the folks who were picking up the work, but I want to move through a couple more points first. So this is our virtual board that we used 2010, 2011, 2012 for the most part. This workflow worked for us for a while, and almost 3 years, just to kind of put that in perspective. That simple 4 lanes worked perfect for us for a long time, until we got to a certain point, and we'll get there. So let's talk about management. 2010 and onward, up until now, I think, is really kind of when the management ideals and principles, if you will, for Etsy really, really came into their own. We really started thinking about a couple of things that drove many other areas of the ops team. And those are these. Some of you may have seen these before, but I think they're super important because they're still relevant today. So we accepted failures, but we didn't lower our standards. Failures are going to happen. As an operational person, we all know that we're going to plug our laptop in the data center and the whole site's going to go down. I still am shaken by that one, but we know that hard drives are going to fail in the middle of the night and things are not going to work correctly. So we accept that and we say, hey, maybe we'll build redundant servers. Maybe we'll add more resilience in a lot of different levels. And we did that across the entire organization, not just operations. The second one is Russian, and Reagan said it in his administration, it's trust but verify. So we trusted that people were able to do the work and do it correctly and take care of the communications around that with one another, cross-team, cross-platform. And yet we verified it with metrics, with success metrics as well, or what success was for a project, meaning, hey, did we really reach our goal for this SLA of milliseconds? And SLAs really came about for some of the development stuff throughout the last couple of years. Blameless postmortems. We finally started looking at ourselves and realizing that we needed to step back when we had a failure and understand why we had a failure. Understand that it wasn't anyone's fault. Things happen. People would fess up, obviously, not feeling particularly good about themselves for plugging their laptop in and breaking the network. But that was definitely a thing. The next point, welcome of one-on-ones. How many of you guys have read The Update, The Vent, and the Disaster by Michael Lopp? Okay, you should go read it. How many of you have read Managing Humans? Okay, so you know a lot about that. How many of you are managers? Cool. How many of you are individual contributors? Okay, so more managers. Awesome. So how many of you managers have scheduled one-on-ones with all of your direct reports? Are they more than 30 minutes? More than an hour? Cool. All right. This is the secret sauce for a manager. Having a one-on-one with people and providing them a scheduled time for an outlet that they know that you are going to be 100% concentrated on them, their needs, their wants, their updates, their events, their disasters, that they have your undivided attention in a world of hugely, hugely important things that are outside is really important for them. Oftentimes, employees feel that they don't have a way to talk to their boss in open and honest fashion. Do it in private. Do your one-on-ones in private. First question I ask anyone in a one-on-one when I sit down, and the first question that I'm asked is, hi, how are you? And that little question right there is perhaps one of the most amazing questions to open doors and find out how people are doing. Oh man, last night I didn't sleep because my kids were up all night. You know, it tells you someone's mood immediately off the bat. You know, I really hate the fact that I couldn't get this done yesterday. They're in the I didn't get something done mode, right? And you'll learn more about your individual contributors by actually listening and investing the time in them because they'll invest it back in you. So do one-on-ones if you're not. Career planning. So for the first time, I'd say in end of 2010, yeah, somewhere in there, We started focusing on career planning. The person, the people in the company, making it better. And we did things like peer reviews for the first time, and we did an overall review for folks. We don't do a checkbox for a review. We actually do a full peer review where you'll pick 5 people, 3 to 5 people, your manager approves it, they give feedback, we give upward feedback, and then it's all compiled once a year, and we sit down and we review it. And we really, without changing our workflow to Kanban and freeing up enough mental space, we never would have really been able to concentrate on focusing what we wanted people to be able to do inside of the organization. We wouldn't have been able to focus on paying back even more technical debt that you guys have heard of, right? Deploynator, single stack, monolithic that we have, removing older technologies, all the graphing you've heard about, code as craft. I think without putting the workflow in place, we never would have gotten there. We never would have focused on making sure that there are movements for folks inside of the organization to make sure that they're happy, because the crazy part is you don't want your career path for people inside of your company to be a labyrinth with dead ends. So we made 2 tracks. We made an individual contributor track, and we made a manager track. And there's 6 levels, 1 being the most junior and 6 being the most senior. And they share similar things across each of them. From soft skills, being able to talk, being able to make decisions, being able to interact with other folks, to hard skills. How great are you as a senior network engineer versus, a senior designer? So we kept some similar principles between these 2 tracks, but the manager track clearly dealt with things like one-on-one, budgeting, compensation, level changes, reverbs, which was our review process, PIPs if you needed to, terminations, all the things that you think about that a manager would do that you take on, really. Focusing on people is what I consider a manager to do. That's your job. And I think one of the most important things here that we made clear to the individual contributors is that they did not have to become managers to advance their career. You do not have to be a manager at Etsy to gain more responsibility and to advance your career. It's a really important point. But let's say you want to be a manager. Well, choose to be a manager and you jump over to the manager track and you're like, great, I get some people. And you're like, damn it, I hate one-on-ones, right? So the other important part that we made is that we said, guess what? If you go to a manager track and you really don't like it, you can go back to an individual contributor track. And then a year later, if you want to try your hand at management again, maybe you go back, right? We didn't restrict the movement between the 2 tracks because, again, we wanted to focus on what people wanted to do inside of not only management workflow, but also the workflow of their day-to-day work. So we wanted to make sure that it was consistent, we wanted to make sure that it was easy to change, and that management supported it. So some of the goods of what we changed using Kanban and the management principles is that we had a single point of transparency for the work that we were doing. People could look inside and say, ops has completely full in progress queue, and things are going to be weeks for me, unless I go have a conversation with them, unless we work together and we try and actually collaborate. Now, I said earlier that in 2008, 2009, we had great cooperation. There's a difference between collaboration and cooperation. Cooperation, let's say it's the middle of the winter and we want to make a snowman. Each one of us knows that we have to make a snowman, so we each go and we make a snowball and we put it on top and we make a snowman. That's cooperation. Collaboration, however, is if we all decide that we are going to make an ice sculpture on one large piece of ice. It'd be a big piece of ice, by the way. But we all work on the same piece of ice and we work together and communicate to do different pieces. That's collaboration, and there's a difference. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. Prioritization is absolutely something that became much clearer, we thought. We'll get to that, why we changed. Also, acceptance. The team members finally accepted the flow because they actually helped develop those lanes. They had some investment in it. So by getting acceptance from the team and the flow that you have inside of your organization is going to make your job significantly easier as a manager. And if you're an IC, it's going to make you significantly happier to do it every single day. So that was important. Communication improvements between different teams. There was more conversations going on because the designated ops people were able to actually look at what was a priority in the backlog and go and talk to the mobile team and be like, oh, you needed this? Oh, that's going to be 3 weeks. Oh, we need to move something over here. So we had a lot more communication. Excuse me. Finally, we had better visibility across the entire organization. We had Jira used for every team inside of the company. So everyone could look at everyone else's project and see exactly what was going on. But there were some drawbacks to this. We lacked metrics. Yes, we lacked metrics. I know it's shocking because you hear how many metrics Etsy has, but we really had trouble with the tooling to get the metrics out. The API was not very flexible at the time. And honestly, I didn't really feel like messing with the database directly was something of a wise choice with that Atlassian. And so we had this good. We had the first version was good to a point, but it didn't scale much beyond a couple years and growing the team to what it currently is. And getting reports was really time consuming because I could tell you how many tickets were open and I could tell you how many tickets were closed, but I couldn't tell you the important things of those tickets. Did they change hands 5 times? Did they move backwards? Did they move forwards in terms of actually being a focus of a priority? It was very difficult to understand that. How long they were open, small items, large items. A ticket was a ticket. There was no variables. There was no ability to look inside and see what was going on underneath the hood. And finally, you got the good, the bad, and man, you got the ugly. I mean the blockers. So remember when I said that John Allspaw and I were in charge of the hopper? Guess who was the biggest problem? We were. It's really hard to admit that a system that had so much potential, you fucked up. But we learned some lessons out of it. First of all, probably not a good idea for me to really be a blocker for folks, or John. I had a lot of hair there too. And we realized that things would have to change. And we're going to talk about those things. I want to take a quick stop and show you where things were, because I think it's important. You know how many people we've had in 2010, 2011? Well, now we're going to show you, just to confirm. So 73% growth in GMS. We had 171 total employees, of which 75 were engineering. So that includes development and operations, just to be 100% clear. And we're doing 9.25 billion page views in that year. 2011, 71% increase in GMS. Over 500 million in GMS, going from 3 to 500. That was pretty decent. And we have 269 employees, 52% growth, of which 110, let's say, were 45%, and 12.9 billion page views. Finally, last year, these numbers actually, I think we published most of these, so it shouldn't be a surprise, but we did $895 million in GMS last year. 381 employees at the end of 2012, of which 156, 43% growth from the previous year, were engineers. And we did 16.7 billion page views. So the interesting thing that I think that we realized at the end of 2012 that we're going to have to adjust for in what we do in terms of management, priorities, planning, is that mobile will most likely take over more requests per second than the desktop for us this year. We'll see how it ends up. But, you know, capacity planning. So, as Led Zeppelin once said, there was still time to change the road you're on. And we did. So what did we change? We changed removing myself from the equation. Felt pretty good. Metrics. Finally, we're able to get metrics. And I'm going to show you some of those and explain to you what they mean to us and some stories that go along with them in a minute or two. And we empowered the team to make decisions. Empowered the team, and once you see the workflow, it'll become clear what that means. We introduced this new variable of due dates. Sounds like a simple concept, but it's actually an opportunity for the requestor and the requestee to truly understand what the goals and the constraints of that ticket are and have a more in-depth conversation around the due date of things. Due dates were not firm. They are not firm for us right now in this new system. They are a guideline for us to be able to work with all of the other variables, such as hardware dies, you need to replace it inside of the org. And all of these people today, that's the current full stack of everybody that you see inside of operations at Etsy, is using is using this new workflow, which allowed me and others to turn around and actually have more one-on-ones because we freed up mental space. The new workflow is called beer can. Technically, it's Kanban for us, and it's been a work in progress over the last 6 months. It's our version of Kanban. It holds the basic same principles, work and limit progresses for in progress, and utilizes the movements within the board, but they're more flexible, and we have metrics. And finally, driven by those closest to the work. So, Lieutenant Colonel retired Scott Snook, who is a professor at Harvard and wrote the book Friendly Fire, talks about driven expertise, meaning the people who are closest to the work are probably the best people for telling you how the work should be done. And I truly believe that is a huge point that we didn't hit the first iteration. So, without further ado, this is the new workflow. Holy shit, that's ugly, right? And it's confusing, and we're all like, what? So let's break it down a little bit, right? So, someone is still putting a ticket in to the queue, right? So we have this queue now. It's no longer a hopper. Ticket goes in there, and we want this queue to be cleared within 48 hours, meaning that we want the conversation between the requester and the requestee to happen relatively soon. And that conversation, if I put a ticket in and say, I need this done without a due date, without any explanation, my assumption as the person requesting the work is that it's going to be done immediately, right? Pretty easy assumption from folks. However, that's not always the case because the person who is receiving the work is like, I've got A, B, and C that has to get done. Should I move C? Should I do A? So we want to encourage that there's a conversation around this based around the actual work that actually has to get done. So keeping the queue clear, and we're still doing designated ops at this point. So people who are seeing the tickets that are coming in that they're designated, they're grabbing them and having conversations about other work or covering for other people. And you can move things from the queue to the backlog, obviously. And the priorities that you see, the 1, 2, the 1, 3, 4, 2, all of those, basic rules that we made for ourselves were P1s were essentially remediation items from outages. They came out of postmortems. Or there were very high priority tickets that had to get done within a couple days or so, potentially a couple days. P2s were like a week or two, you know, somewhere in that range. You don't want it to go too long. P3s were probably a little bit farther out than that, 3 weeks or so. And P4 is where, we'll get to it maybe. I don't think we've assigned a P4 because they're just so low on the list. So we wanted to make sure that we were able to prioritize things a little bit better in a general sense, not very firm. You can also move things from the queue to the backlog, and then we introduced 2 new lanes, well, columns really. Project, because we wanted to start tracking projects a little bit differently, and then someday. We had a lot of great ideas as a team because we let people think on their own about what they wanted to do. So we've provided this someday queue, and it's been actually filling up quite nicely. I mentioned earlier we introduced this idea of a due date. So when a ticket moves from the queue to the backlog, and that conversation happens between the requestor and the requestee, we're also assigning, if it's P2 or P1, and I believe sometimes a P3, depending upon the ticket, a due date. An idea of when we want to have it done that we can then track. Not a firm deadline in the sand, but something that we can work with someone and shift some things around. So let's take a closer look at the flexibility in the backlog, because this is really where we changed a lot of things. Now, regular Kanban, you can move things from the backlog to in progress and then do the work and close the ticket. Makes sense. However, now let's say you take something from the backlog, you move it to in progress, and let's say it's a brand new HP server and the memory goes on it. Now you gotta wait, if you didn't buy the upgraded super duper warranty package from HP, you gotta wait a day maybe for next business day. But because you have work and limit progress, you would be stuck holding that ticket and not being able to potentially take another one, right? So now we're able to actually move that into the backlog because we know we'll get to it. It's still a P2. It's still going to meet the deadline for the due date, but you can grab other work and work on it. Or you can move it into the backlog and lower the priority because let's say the backplane on that server is screwed and back ordered for 6 weeks, right? You're going to not want to be blocked by that ticket. So you're able to move that back, assign a new deadline to it, and a new priority to it. In progress. You know it can go to done already, but it can also go to someday into projects. So this is the basic flow of how things are working inside of Beer Can. So I tried to put this diagram together in the next slide because I thought it looks really good. And, and really the queue you want to keep clear, right? That was everyone's responsibility on the team to keep it clear. Not John, not myself. Everybody on the team. And we have nags that will tell you. Assigning a priority, assigning a due date, working with the person who put the ticket in to understand what's going on, moving it to in progress or to done, moving it to project or moving it to someday. So I showed this to a couple people on the team and they said, that sucks. And I was like, great. And I said, what do you think I should do it differently? And they're like, yeah, you got to do it with like diagrams and flow and this. So digest this next diagram for a minute. This is the more complex flow. The slides will be up. You can take your time later. Ask me questions, I swear. But this is the complete flow of everything inside of BeerCan and how it works and which ways you can go and what you can and can't do. So, all right. So the good out of this, right? Well, first of all, the remotes are feeling more empowered to actually do their job. They don't need to wait for John and myself to make decisions on things. They can move through the tickets relatively fast. They can help people because we are a service-oriented, organization within Etsy, servicing the other arms of the different development teams as well as MITs and everything. And the priorities can be more dynamic, which is the nature of the web work. We don't work in a car manufacturing area, right? So we also finally got graphs. Yay. It's a funny story about that top left one for the backlog. So around the middle of it, you see that there's kind of a large drop off. Yeah, we kind of went to Velocity and didn't do any work for that week before. So that kind of sucked. And then if you look at the graph below, you kind of see that that drop off lines up with that really large gray block of matter in there. That was after John Cowie presented Oculus at Velocity and closed all of his tickets. We were like, yes. So we learned a lesson there that, some people probably should close their tickets earlier. But we also understood, too, that our DBA, who's the green at the bottom, pretty consistent in his level of work. He's had a couple large spikes there, but pretty consistent. And then at the bottom, it says unprioritized queues. There's a lot of orange, and then underneath the orange and above the purple, I don't know if you can see it on here, but there's some red. So the orange is someday. So we started generating lots and lots and lots of good ideas, right, while we were out and about and doing things. But what we learned out of this is the red is the receiving queue. It's that queue that's supposed to be clear every 48 hours. We weren't doing it. So we were able to find that through these metrics and through the nags that we have and be able to jump on that and actually fix it. The other two graphs to the right, those are brand new graphs. So the point of this and the point of those graphs is don't stop adding metrics to understand what's going on. Clearly, as Pedro said earlier in his presentation, there'll be a saturation point where all these metrics just are really hard and you might have to build a HUD or something to actually analyze, but we're not there yet, We're working on it. The graphs on the right, I'll get to the ones on the left in a second, but the graphs on the right are really interesting. Closed by team. Obviously, operations closes the vast majority of the tickets in the operations workflow. What's really interesting is product is also closing tickets in our workflow. Wow, they're actually doing boot camps and working with us and doing Nagios alerts and racking servers. That's awesome. We have some really good data now to determine if we're going to improve over time. The bottom shows you a nice split of people who are opening the tickets for us. Clearly, production is opening the vast majority, or 50%, and ops is opening 50%. The lower left graph, missed due dates, I can finally find out when I don't do my work. The point of this is not that we want to exactly have that response. Why didn't you do your work? It's we want to understand that if there are due dates that are being pushed or missed, we understand why. Is the person overloaded? Are they not getting enough sleep? Is there an imbalance in what they're doing? Is there something that we actually have to help them in order to do their job better? Not that they're not doing their job. So then we have this cool graph called MTTR, right? By priorities. And on the left is days. And I made this graph and I said, I'm going to stand up in front of a bunch of people. What the fuck is that? I was like, oh shit, P2 is taking 125 days and a P1 taking 100 or 125 and 175. I was like, I should be embarrassed and replace this graph. And then you know what it made me do? It made me go and look what those spikes were. What did they mean? Well, see the all in the green? We had some tickets that were old, clearly, like 4 months. And the first one was actually, the first two that were P2 were actually MySQL tickets that we had to do, but we were required on waiting for version upgrades, and we wanted to do some changes to our grants, and we wanted to find the right time working with the rest of the business. So we put them into the someday queue, so they had a very, very old create date. So when we moved it in here, it skewed the metrics. But the point is that I had to go look and find out what it was. The red was actually a remediation item that we didn't do in time, and we made the mistake of not doing it within the SLA that we set of 30 days. So we ended up going and fixing it, and we can tell that we didn't do our job, which is cool. But now we know, and that was awesome. So another graph, really cool. Oldest ticket in the backlog. Wow. Again, I was like, why am I going to show this to everybody? It's kind of embarrassing, right? So we have this one ticket that I think was opened in 2008. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but maybe not that much. And there are different P1, P2, and P3 subtasks assigned to those tickets, right? Because it's a large project, and it's commonly referred to as Ops 118, which is the, John's like shaking his head, it's great. It's like, no. The despoffification and chefification of the services inside of Etsy, which means we still have a couple servers that are not chefed, and we still have a couple servers that are single points of failure. But what this also may tell me is that if this line doesn't go down over time, perhaps we've eaten through the smaller tickets quicker, and these are larger tickets. So it may indicate to me that I actually need to hire somebody to help us do more work. So for the first time, I can actually go to John and be like, hey man, I need to hire somebody. Why? Right? I don't have to have like a 5-hour conversation of being like, I think I need 3 people. Why not 12? Well, shit, that sounds great. And he's like, no, you can't have 12. Oh my God. You know? So I think that this is an awesome graph. I love this graph, right? So there's a couple more. But we also now are tracking the velocity of priority change. That's awesome. We know now when someone is going in and changing from a P3 to a P1, or a P1 to a P2. In this case, we now know that we opened a P1 and we moved it to a P2 in the backlog, which means it's active, it's being worked on, it's not closed. Green indicates closed, red indicates open in a priority. But I would look and say, why did we lower that? Why was it a P1 to begin with as opposed to a P2? Oh, we went in and looked, and guess what? It turns out that that P1 ticket now requires us to order hardware that's going to take 8 weeks. It's an exaggeration, but in this case, it was like 3 weeks, and we wanted to deprioritize it because it was skewing metrics, right? So we made that decision to move it, and then it would become important later. Maybe not the right decision, but we did it. Another set of graphs, again, priority change. I think what's really interesting is that the top graphs, specifically the top left, I'm really happy about. We're not taking P1s and making them P3s, which means we're probably prioritizing P1s and P2s pretty correctly. You know, close enough that for government work, if you will, since we're in Washington. But we also are moving P2s up, which means maybe we're missing some deadlines, so I can correlate some of that data back. And down below, we're also moving P3 to P1 and P3 to P2, which means, again, maybe we are not concentrating enough on what those P3 tickets are, right? Maybe we're forgetting that there's P3 tickets because, look, they're moving from 3 to 1 and 3 to 2. So now I'm able to actually say, look at this. I can tell that things are moving from the backlog in priority because maybe the conversation or the due dates are coming up and people are getting on it, or maybe because we're about to miss a deadline, or maybe that there's something else going on, and I can look at that. You know what would be really awesome to look at that besides green and red? A list. So this is a priority change history, right? Out of all the priority changes, this is a sample. Clearly, the other one could be much bigger, but for your benefit, you know, this shows you from where to what and what queue it is if it's closed or in the backlog, right? So that gives us an idea of being able to click and generate, and we'll probably do some more intelligent things with this later on, but this process has only been in place for a couple months, like I think 5 or 6 at this point. So what's the good? Well, it's our flow, and I'll change it when I want to. It's fantastic, right? Collaboration is happening even more. I'd say probably more than the first Kanban version, and it's pretty impressive that I am not facilitating the collaboration amongst groups. The team is empowered and responsible for doing that themselves, and they don't wait for permission to do it, they do it on their own. It's pretty powerful that they feel that that's an important part of their job. I've been working for a long time to do that, and so is John, I know that, so we're pretty happy and pretty lucky because we told them that this is how they can work. and they made it up too, right? They had input into that this is the process that they want. This is what is driven by those closest to the work. It's more flexible. It's a lot more flexible. Some people would say it's too flexible, but you have to remember that this has evolved over the last 5 or 6 months for us. So starting out, it's probably much simpler if I remember correctly. We've added a couple transitions and flows in there that made sense because of situations, but it's definitely more flexible. And we're identifying those issues quicker before they impact our users. Because we're involved and because those that are closest to the work are actually making those decisions and saying, oh, wait, you said you needed 5 servers? We only ordered you 2. Oh, you're going to hit the database how? No, that's not a good idea, right? So being involved, designated ops, and a workflow that empowers your people to actually do their job is hugely important. But there are some drawbacks, right? It's actually really hard to say if we're doing better than the original version because we don't have enough data and we're still gathering that data. And we're going to know more as this goes on. But speaking of data, that stuff can be misleading. 175 days, come on, right? I'd be fired if it was 175 days for real. I'd fire myself, by the way. And obviously, keeping the queue clear has been a challenge, right? John and I were 2 blockers. Now the team is being more self-motivated by seeing these graphs to understand that they have to keep the queue clear because it's their responsibility. But on occasion, we've had to remind them to be, 100% transparent about the workflow. And, I'm sure there'll be another evolution of how we do it. And things will change. So let's sum this up. Try something new. If your workflow is boring, people are kind of demotivated and they're not, wanting to work, try something new. And don't be afraid to change it. Fail fast. Don't fail open, fail closed. Try something new. Measure it. We're at the stage in everything that we do that you should be able to work with a number of providers to get the metrics out, as opposed to very early for us in our workflow and our management of not being able to understand what we were doing. And now you should be able to understand how things are working after 3 months, 6 months, a year. Start small. Like I said, we went with a very simple version, obviously, and that's the last point. Keep it simple. Build it up over time for what makes sense for you, and listen to the people who are using it, and change. Thank you. Yeah. If there's questions, I'm happy to answer or try. Sure, Theo.
So you have a lot of objective metrics around that.
Yep.
There's highly subjective input for the, I assume, self-classification of P1 through P3 or P4 and P4.
Yep.
Have you considered providing rigorous structure around the classification of your P1 through P4 to fix that problem? And if so, what?
We haven't yet. It probably is something that we will talk about in the future. We're coming up on a review of all of this really internally, and that potentially could change, yes. So if you have any suggestions, I'm open to hearing them.
It's a classic problem
it is.
It out, right?
Yep. What you put into the system is what you're going to get out of it, absolutely, right. So it's definitely something that I think as a team, much like when we changed from version 1 to version 2 of our flow, or version 2 to version 3, we'll do what we think is good for us, and then we'll measure, and then we'll change it again, so yeah.
How many people in your organization are allowed to elect or choose a key priority for that, or is that a limited set of people?
Everyone inside of the ops team is allowed to take those priorities. And really, the requestor putting the ticket in saying it's a P1 may not be a P1, which is why that conversation that happens is so important for people, because then it may actually be a P2. So it's a collaborative effort initially, and if it changes later on, it'll be the person who either grabbed it, is assigned to it, but anyone in the org who's working, if we're doing a large project and we're peering, can change those things around if they see fit, which is why we track the velocity of the changes. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit more about the projects column in your system?
Sure. Can I talk a little bit more about the project column inside of BeerCan? So the project column is really meant for larger projects like replace the load balancers that serve the site. It's kind of a large ticket with a lot of sub-tickets that we would create and be able to actually track the overall progress of how long it would take, how many subtasks are they being closed, are they being moved off. Those are things we probably have to build still that we haven't, but for the most part it was to put the projects in one section that we can then take a look at and try and work on more. I don't know if that answers it, but somebody.
I'm super curious.
Sure.
In the opening, you talked about plugging a laptop in.
Yeah.
And there was an outage.
Yeah.
But you didn't really talk about whether there was a relationship between those two events. Because you mentioned unplugging a laptop and then the site went down again. If you can talk about it, what was the cause? Or
What's that?
Just curious.
Yeah. So, yes, I can talk about it. I'm not ashamed to admit that we had a spanning tree problem. There's classes and therapy for that. Anyhow. You've been having your hand up a bunch of times.
Yeah, I was wondering, what's the difference between, so it looks like you could take a P3 and make it like a P1, and what's the difference between taking like P3 and changing the due date to be something that would be more recent?
It's a good question. Typically the two are not highly tied together, right? If it's a P3, we consider it, like I said, as a general rule, a couple weeks out, right? So if it's a P3 with a deadline of tomorrow, maybe it's not a P3. Maybe it's a P2 or a P1. And that is the discussion, and that is this, the nice part of this flow is that if you really think that it needs to be done tomorrow, then it really isn't a P3, and we need to talk about the other things.
Is it the difference like 3 weeks from the time it first came in?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I mean, it could be from the time they came in. Yes. For the most part, for us, that's what it is. Yep. Yep. Yes. I'll get to you.
What percentage of a typical day of the ops people spent monkeying around with priorities, changing tickets, and having those conversations?
Sure. So the question was, what percentage of the ops day is with changing priorities and monkeying around in conversations? No monkey graphs yet, but I'll work on that. So for everyone it varies, right? And I think the reason why it varies for everyone is that everyone has a different level of throughput on my team. So I've got one guy who does a tremendous job of closing anywhere from 10 to 20 tickets in a day. And I got one guy who maybe will close 2 in a day, right? Also, it's hard to tell, well, it's getting easier to tell, I should say, if those tickets are very large, like a project and subtasks, or if they're a very small thing. Create an email address, right, for Corp IT, let's say, or, change the load balancers. So the percentage I'm going to say at this point is anywhere between 10 and 20%, depending upon the person, maybe a little higher, maybe 5% for people who are a little lower. I tend to be a talker in case you can't tell. So, yeah. Might be something we should also measure better. Last one. Okay, you've had your hand up for a while, so.
Do your projects ever generate work for other engineering teams in the company? If so, how do you deal with the workflow?
I don't think it's really a clash. So the answer is yes. We certainly do. If I stood up here and said, nope, nothing we do causes anyone else any other pain, that's a total lie. We do generate other work for other folks, and going and having us be the requestor or the requestee, and them being the person who's doing the work. I'm confusing my requestors and requestees now. But us putting the ticket in, we now, because we are used to having that communication on our ends, I think we've gone beyond to say, hey, look, I really need this done. What is your workload like? And we actually reverse it around. So we work with the other groups as much as we work with them when they come into us. And their workflows, they manage a lot as well. The whole company doesn't use this workflow. Each group will have a little bit different workflow, but for the most part, I haven't seen in weekly reports or anything like that where they're like, ops is a blocker, or ops is causing us problems, or there's too much work, which is a good indication to us if there was something wrong with this, that we were blocking more people than actually helping them, then we'd probably have to change very quickly. So it really hasn't been a problem.